I was sitting in the living room last Tuesday when I noticed the photograph again. It's been on the mantle for probably 20 years now, but I don't always see it, not really. That day I did. It shows my 3 children standing together at Rachel's wedding, arms around each other, laughing at something someone said just before the shutter clicked. David was 28 then, Rachel 26, and Michael 23. They looked so easy with each other, so natural. I stared at that photograph for a long time, trying to remember the last time the 3 of them were in the same room together. It's been 4 years, maybe 5. I lose track now. The house is quiet most days. George passed in 2019, and since then the silence has a different quality to it. It's not lonely exactly, though I suppose that's part of it. It's more that I notice things I didn't before. The way the refrigerator hums. The sound of my own footsteps on the kitchen tile. The absence of voices. I always thought I'd have more time with noise in my life, with family coming and going, with grandchildren running through these rooms. I imagine holidays full of chaos and laughter. Imagine myself as the kind of mother and grandmother who held everyone together. I don't know when I stopped imagining that. Somewhere along the way I just accepted that it wasn't going to be that way, and I stopped thinking about what it might have been. My children loved each other when they were young. I remember that clearly. David, the oldest, always took his role seriously. He made sure Rachel and Michael had what they needed, settled their arguments, taught Michael to ride a bike when George was working overtime. Rachel was the bridge between her brothers, the one who could make both of them laugh, who organized the games they played in the backyard. Michael was the baby, the one they both protected and teased in equal measure. They shared a language I couldn't quite understand, the way siblings do. They had their fights, of course. There were slammed doors and shouted accusations and tears, but underneath it all was something solid. They were a unit. I took comfort in that. I thought it meant they'd always have each other, no matter what happened to me and George. George and I married young. I was 21. He was 23. We didn't have much money, but we had plans. He worked at the plant, and I worked part-time at the elementary school, and when David came along I quit to stay home. That was what you did then. Rachel came 2 years later, then Michael 3 years after that. Our life was full in the way young families are full, with diapers and doctor's appointments and school projects and birthday parties. George worked long hours. I managed the house, managed the children, managed the small daily emergencies that come with raising 3 kids in a modest 3-bedroom house. We were tired most of the time. We were happy, I think, though we didn't talk about happiness much. You just kept moving forward, doing what needed to be done. I loved my children fiercely, but I wasn't demonstrative about it. My own mother had been the same way. You showed love through action, through packed lunches and clean clothes, and making sure everyone had what they needed. You didn't sit around talking about feelings. George was even less expressive than I was. He was a good father in all the practical ways. He provided. He showed up. He fixed things when they broke. But he didn't know how to have conversations that went below the surface. Neither of us did, really. We thought the love was understood. We thought our children knew. As they got older, the house stayed busy, but the connections started to thin out in ways I didn't notice at the time. David went to college 2 hours away and came home less and less often. He got serious about his studies, then about his career. He met Jennifer his senior year and married her a year after graduation. They moved to Atlanta for his job. Rachel stayed closer, went to the state university 40 minutes away, moved back home for a year after graduating before finding work and her own apartment in town. Michael struggled more. He wasn't academic like David or socially confident like Rachel. He went to community college, dropped out, worked a series of jobs he didn't much care about. George worried about him constantly, though he expressed it as criticism rather than concern. I tried to defend Michael, but that just made George frustrated with both of us. The distance that grew between my children happened slowly, like water wearing down stone. You don't notice it happening until one day you see the shape has changed. David's life in Atlanta became full with work, with Jennifer's family, with their own plans and ambitions. When they visited, which wasn't often, the conversation stayed on safe topics: his job, the weather, what needed fixing around our house. He'd ask about Rachel and Michael in that polite way that indicated he didn't really know what was going on in their lives. Rachel got married to Tom when she was 29, and by then David came home maybe twice a year. He made it to the wedding, stood in the photographs, gave a toast that was warm and funny. But after that weekend, he went back to his life, and Rachel went back to hers. Michael wasn't in the wedding party. Rachel asked him to do a reading during the ceremony instead, and I saw the hurt in his face even though he said it was fine. Michael's struggles became more apparent as he moved through his 20s. He had trouble keeping jobs, trouble with relationships, trouble with money. George lost patience with him. I remember arguments in this very living room. George's voice getting louder, Michael's face getting redder, both of them saying things they shouldn't have said. Rachel tried to stay neutral, but ended up pulling away from Michael too. She had her own life to build, her own marriage to tend to. David sent money once when Michael asked, but the request seemed to embarrass both of them, and after that Michael stopped asking. David stopped offering. The space between them grew wider. I tried to hold things together. I called each of them regularly, shared news about the others, suggested family dinners that usually didn't happen. When they did happen, the conversation felt strained. David and Jennifer would talk about their renovations or their vacation plans. Rachel and Tom would share stories about their friends or their jobs. Michael would sit quietly, answering questions when asked, but not volunteering much. George would eat his food and make occasional comments about sports or politics. I would try to draw everyone out, to create the warmth and connection I remembered from when they were young, but you can't manufacture that. The more I tried, the more hollow it all felt. George's health started declining about 6 years before he died. Heart problems, then diabetes, then everything seemed to go wrong at once. The children came around more during that time, especially toward the end, but the visits felt dutiful rather than natural. They'd sit with him, talk to him, but I could see they didn't know quite what to say to each other when they crossed paths in the hospital hallway or our living room. Rachel and David were polite, asking each other surface-level questions. Michael seemed to feel like an outsider in his own family, showing up at odd hours, never quite fitting into the shifts Rachel had organized for us. After George died, after the funeral, they scattered again, back to their lives, their cities, their own problems. The turning point, if I can call it that, wasn't dramatic. It was Thanksgiving 2 years after George passed. I'd invited everyone, hoped they'd all come. David and Jennifer said they were going to her parents' house in Florida. Rachel and Tom were hosting Tom's family. Michael said he'd come, but the day before he called and said he'd picked up a shift at work, needed the money. I didn't argue with any of them. I told them I understood. I made a small turkey breast for myself, watched the parade on television, went to bed early. That night I lay in the dark and realized I'd been pretending for a long time that things were fine, that the distance was temporary, that eventually everyone would come back together. But they weren't coming back together. That was the truth I'd been avoiding. My children had grown apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. I wasn't sure it could be fixed. I started thinking about my part in it all. That's what you do when you get old and have too much time alone. You turn things over in your mind, examining them from different angles, seeing things you missed when you were younger and busier. I thought about how I'd always assumed love was enough, that providing and caring and being present in the practical ways was sufficient. I thought about all the conversations we never had, the feelings we never named, the conflicts we smoothed over instead of working through. George and I had created a household that functioned, but maybe didn't connect, not in the ways that last. We taught our children to be independent, to handle their own problems, to keep moving forward, but we didn't teach them how to need each other. We didn't model vulnerability or emotional honesty. We showed them how to survive, but not necessarily how to stay close. I thought about the ways I'd handled their conflicts when they were younger, always rushing to smooth things over, to make peace, to move past the discomfort as quickly as possible. I'd never let them sit in the hard feelings, work through the disagreements, learn to repair what was broken between them. I just wanted everyone to be happy, to get along, to avoid the messiness of real conflict. So they learned to avoid it too. learned to pull back instead of pushing through. And now they're three separate people living three separate lives, with very little connecting them except shared history and genetics. I could blame David for moving away, for getting absorbed in his career and his wife's family, for treating his siblings like distant relatives instead of people he grew up with. I could blame Rachel for being so focused on her own marriage and friendships that she didn't make space for her brothers. I could blame Michael for his struggles, for becoming someone his siblings didn't know how to relate to anymore. But blame doesn't help anything. They're all doing the best they can with what they learned, with who they are. They're not bad people. They're just people who drifted apart, the way many siblings do. I had a small health scare last spring. Nothing life-threatening, but it required a hospital stay and some recovery time. Rachel came by most days, bringing groceries, checking on me, making sure I took my medications. She was kind and helpful and efficient. David called regularly, offered to fly in if I needed him. I told him I was fine. Michael texted a few times, asked if I needed anything. I said I was okay. None of them asked if the others were helping. None of them coordinated with each other. They each did their individual duty to their mother, but they didn't function as a family. That hurt more than the medical issue did. When I was recovered and sitting alone again in this quiet house, I realized I couldn't fix what was broken between them. I tried for years, in my subtle ways, to bring them back together. But you can't want something for other people more than they want it themselves. They have to want it. They have to decide it matters. And maybe it doesn't matter to them the way it matters to me. Maybe they're content with their separate lives, with occasional phone calls and rare visits. Maybe the closeness they had as children was just a function of proximity and age, and once they became adults with their own paths, the bond wasn't strong enough to survive the distance. That's a hard thing for a mother to accept, but I think it's true. I look at that photograph now, and I see something different than I used to see. I used to see proof that they loved each other, evidence that the bond was real. Now I see a moment captured in time, a moment that's gone and can't be recreated. They did love each other. I don't doubt that. But love isn't always enough to overcome everything else, all the small accumulated distances and unspoken resentments and different priorities. Sometimes love just becomes part of the past, something you remember fondly but don't actively maintain. That's what happened to my children. They loved each other once, when they were young, when they lived in the same house and shared the same daily life. They probably still love each other in some abstract way, but they don't know each other anymore, not really. And I don't think they miss each other the way I wish they would. I've stopped trying to engineer reconciliation or togetherness. I call each of them once a week, keep the conversations light. Don't press for information about the others. Don't push for family gatherings that no one really wants. When they ask how I'm doing, I say I'm fine, because anything else would be a burden they don't know how to carry. I've learned to accept the limits of what we are now, what we became without quite meaning to. It's lonely, yes, but it's also reality, and I've never been someone who hides from reality for long. What I've learned, if there's anything worth passing on from all this living and reflecting, is that families don't stay together automatically. Love doesn't maintain itself without attention and effort and honest communication. You can't assume people will always be there just because they're related to you, just because you raised them in the same house and they once played together in the same backyard. You have to build something stronger than shared history. You have to teach people how to talk to each other, how to work through hard things, how to choose each other even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. George and I didn't know how to do that. We did our best with what we knew, but it wasn't enough to keep our children connected to each other into adulthood. I don't tell my children any of this. It wouldn't help. They're living their own lives, managing their own challenges, doing the best they can just like everyone else. They don't need their elderly mother explaining what went wrong or wishing things were different. They call on my birthday, on holidays. They send cards. David and Jennifer are talking about finally having a baby, which means I might become a grandmother soon, and that brings its own complicated feelings. Rachel and Tom seem happy in their own quiet way. Michael is still struggling, still searching for something he can't quite name, but he's managing. They're all okay, each in their own sphere, and I suppose that's what matters most. Some evenings I sit in this living room and imagine what it would be like if they were close, if they called each other just to talk, if they visited each other's homes, if they remembered each other's birthdays without prompting. I imagine holidays where they actually want to be together, where conversation flows naturally, where they laugh about shared memories and create new ones. But then I let those imaginings fade, because they're just fantasies, and I'm too old for fantasies. This is what is. 3 separate people who came from the same place, but ended up in different worlds, connected by blood and history, but not much else. My children loved each other, truly loved each other, until I got old and could see clearly what had been happening all along. They'd been growing apart for years, so slowly I didn't notice, and now here we are. Here I am, sitting with the truth of it. That's all you can do in the end. Sit with the truth, accept what is, and keep loving them anyway, even from a distance, even in silence, even when they don't know how to love each other anymore.